Okay. As we start having some folks come in today, you're in the right spot. This is the Expiro webinar on how to use a notebook and analytics with trading applications. A couple of housekeeping items for today's webinar. Number one, we'll be recording everything today. We'll send out a follow-up email if you want to share with other folks. Second item is, as we get to the end, what we'll do is we'll have Q&A. So if there are questions that come up, there's a panel at the bottom. Please go ahead and enter your questions, and we'll certainly answer those towards the end. There'll be a few minutes. And with that, I will hand the ball off to Brian Hall and Lynn Pozick for today's session.
Thanks, Scott. Today, I'm presenting with my colleague, Lynn Pozick. My name is Brian Hall. I lead the Graph and Analytics practice here at Expiro. Lynn?
Hey everybody, I'm Lynn Pozick, and I drive our product practice as well as do quite a bit of work in the financial sector.
We're talking to you today from Expiro. We focus on designing and delivering and developing software and data products. We focus in intelligent analytics, and we're currently incubating some novel ventures. Been in business almost 20 years, touching on many different industries. While we're focusing today on financial services, we also have assets and project experiences in biotech, agriculture, real estate, headquartered in Texas, a lot of oil and gas and healthcare, retail, education, defense and industry, power and supply chain. While we're here to talk to you today about financial applications, we have experience in project qualifications, doing several different things within that industry, starting with building products all the way from the ground up, ideation and requirements capture with end users, all the way to building it up for trading applications, platform and portfolio management, and cash and treasury management systems. Oftentimes, you don't walk into environments with a blank whiteboard. You have existing ecosystems that need to be modernized or migrated to or from. So we specialize in preserving portions of your ecosystem that you already want to keep or surface or up level to capture and maintain a lot of your existing investment. Machine learning and network analytics, where we'll be talking quite a bit today. And then new and something that we're excited about and interested to talk to you further is a lot of work we've been doing around anti-money laundering and fraud. We actually have a new venture, a new product called the Fraud Workbench. But today we're going to be focusing on machine learning and network analytics and how you might be able to use notebooks to further your endeavors in this space. Having been in business almost 20 years, we've done work with several different clients, many referenceable customers in several different industries. You see here today, many in the credit card processing, financial management, money management, and trading and platform services. We also acknowledge that corporate enterprises are complex and it's very heterogeneous. So we have encountered several different technologies and technology stacks, and we understand that we need to integrate with things that may already be there. So we've got experiences with all sorts of web and mobile interfaces, cloud infrastructure, multilingual and multi-desktop integration experiences, a whole myriad of databases and analytics and machine learning engines. What we'll be talking about today is why notebooks in the first place, kind of put them in a context for how they might be used in a trading scenario. A quick demo that Lynn will show you with respect to the art of the possible, and then we'll talk a little bit in detail about some of the challenges and opportunities for using and deploying notebooks in a trading setting. But first, I'd like to kind of take a little detour and talk to you about a cautionary tale, the Mars Climate Orbiter. Going all the way back to the mid-60s, NASA was actually interested in exploring and data collection for the Mars, for the planet Mars. 9.5 months after planning the launch, the Mars Climate Orbiter was scheduled to begin the process of establishing an orbit around Mars. And the plan was to use a technique called aerobraking to reduce the velocity and slowly move into the Martian atmosphere. On September 23rd of 1999, the orbiter began its insertion into the atmosphere, and just over 4 minutes later, the orbiter passed behind Mars and went out of radio contact. And this was 49 seconds earlier than they had planned, and the orbiter never reestablished contact with NASA. Another way to say this was that the way the media chose to say it was that on September 23rd, 1999, the Mars Climate Orbiter lost during the attempt to establish orbit simply because of a mathematical error. This was an initiative that had been invested in north of $300 million, planned for 4+ years, and was in orbit or en route for 3/4 of a year. And ultimately, this mission was unsuccessful. When they did a debrief, they learned that the cause of this snafu was simply a calculation that did not get translated from the English units to a metric unit. So you ask yourself, how in the world could such an oversight happen given the 9-figure investment and a 4+ year project plan to put together this Mars orbiter? This is not to belabor the point, but oftentimes good science can be taken down by bad engineering rigor. But we're here today to talk about data science in trading, and not NASA or space flight. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn to walk us through this.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian, for that great intro. So the scenario Brian was just talking about, although that was about aerospace engineering largely, still pretty pertinent in trading as well. And it's one of the scenario examples that gets us excited about notebooks and the role that notebooks and data science can have and is having in trading. And one of the things that Brian was alluding to there with the Mars scenario is that some of what was lost somewhere in their process was trying to figure out where you needed more precision and more maybe quick, accurate input and feedback and answers versus being able to, kind of do less precise calculations to get directionally correct. And that we see that a lot in many of the sectors that we work in, but certainly in the financial sector. And it's one of the reasons we decided to start talking about notes and giving classes and using Python and notebooks and all kinds of things, and help our customers often as part of their modernization efforts and other things they're doing seriously consider where using notebooks and Python and other new things in addition to Excel and some of their tried and true tools. So that's kind of the tie in there and some of the things we want to talk about today. So, if we elevate the discussion here just for a minute, it's very interesting. So data science in the financial sector has had really wildly varying impact. So on the one hand, you have some financial instruments and some transactional elements and analytics that lend themselves very well to kind of plugging in some quick algorithm responses, a little bit more sophisticated deep learning models. And when things are simpler, there's been a lot of traction there. The data isn't as complicated. It's easier to train different forms of AI. And overall, the process might be a little bit simpler, contrasted by on the right-hand side here, when we start talking about more complex financial instruments, and we play in both front, middle office, equities, derivatives, OTCs, CLOs, we play across all these. So we're kind of seeing the breadth of things. And as things get more complicated, there's less and less automation and less uptake of data science and in terms of operationalizing that data science. There's a lot of kind of like shadow IT that happens where orange is the new green. And so some people are spinning up notebooks and kind of replacing or augmenting their Excel as a little shadow project. But really getting in there and operationalizing that is one of the things that is exciting. There's lots of opportunities as we talk about some of these more complex financial instruments. And that's one of the use cases we wanted to focus on today. Great. And so one of the reasons that that's happening, if you kind of think about this, and this is all giving you some context to kind of where notebooks specifically fit in. If you think about, a lot of this work is going to be predicated, a lot of AI is predicated on data, a lot of work in Excel, and notebooks is predicated on data, right? And so when you have data that is more complex, often siloed, disorganized, it can be an effort just to get the information you need in a batch job overnight, right? Let alone having it well organized in the cloud in a way that it's connected and that can be really utilized thoroughly for data science. So that's kind of on the far left of the continuum there. We're often many of our clients, they're kind of climbing that data cliff and trying to figure out how to get their data connected so they can do data science, so they can do more advanced analytics and intelligent analytics, and then eventually graduate to the right-hand side where a lot of folks, trader desks that deal with simpler instruments enjoy some of that autonomous AI interaction, some augmented decision-making with better and more intelligent analytics. Excuse me, on that left-hand side there in particular, both, but on the left-hand side where, sometimes it can be a real challenge to get your house in order, so to speak, with all the data and those kinds of, as Brian was mentioning a few minutes ago, we do an awful lot of work on modernization projects. So that, that could be a multi-year kind of effort. In the meantime, being able to do some stopgap kinds of things with notebooks that have a foot both in being able to run real code and get more precise and accurate analytics and decisions out of that experience versus Excel, which often doesn't scale very well, and you can't run the all of the data that you'd like to run to generate those analytics or do your research. So there's a lot of good things that you could do on that left-hand side of the continuum if you find yourself in that situation where you have some more complex instruments where there's opportunities to inject notebooks, and we'll look at some of that in a minute. So, but as I mentioned, really both sets of cohorts where things are simpler or more complex. Or this talk is obviously just focused mostly on trading. We use notebooks, as Brian was mentioning, across a variety of things, and from fraud to trading to all kinds of things. Some of the benefits that you get are, as I mentioned, more precise outcomes. But more precise outcomes can also mean more money in the market. So we're going to look at a scenario here in a minute where we're going to have to deal with a compliance issue. And the less precise you are in compliance, what happens? Add more padding, right, to all of your calculations and everything you're doing, which means less money in the market. And that's what happens a lot whenever you have to use less precise methods and you can't run that code quickly to kind of see, how far you can kind of push that envelope. It's also on the flip side, people enjoying their automation where the market is a little simpler. It can be easy to kind of lose sight of the depth of the analysis when you have automated actions happening. It's very important to still keep tracking those and not just looking at, if you have an ML model or something, not just looking at, oh, is my model accurate, but also really understanding, getting in there and digging in and getting that data and see what's really happening and checking for, bias and all of those things that you'd want to look at. Notebooks can be a really great way to examine that and do some deeper analytics if you are already graduated to that other side of the continuum and doing more in-depth analysis. Great things about notebooks. You can, there's very little waiting time. Once in a while, you might have a larger job, you kick up a Spark job or something. But for the most part, you're not waiting for the nightly batch report to run, right? You get access to the data when you need it, whatever data you can have access to, you can pull that in and you can start to utilize it and do, do real work with it. And then finally, something we're going to touch on here in a minute in a little bit more depth, but making sure that the trader or whoever that SME is still in the loop and on the loop, right? Whether you're doing something more automated or deterministic, notebooks can be a great way to also take a beat, either do that analysis or do forward planning. So being able to do things like hypotheticals to really get in there and understand what's happening and have a user be able to provide that input and that feedback either at the time of the transaction or in a notebook as they work through things and collaborate with other SMEs. So here's an example of and this is a very, very simplified example. So your mileage may vary. But when we think about where kind of data science kind of fits, if we kind of distill down, a trading workflow, quote unquote, although there should be like a million arrows and boxes everywhere, depending on what types of transactions you're doing. But it goes something like this. If we're trying to get some analytics or some guidance back from SMEs, like let's say compliance, or data scientists, developer-oriented quants that might be working in more precise ways, trying to give us information. We have our trader desk, and what we're probably going to hit a lot is siloed data or batch information, which can be tricky and it can be an impediment to the timeline for which we want to do our analysis or complete the transaction, right? And then maybe we move on to being able to have analysts, data scientists, quants, some other folks involved that can help us. However, they had some inhibitors too, often with a lot of the kind of the older processes and systems that are a little bit more complex. So they can spend a lot of time just moving data around without something like a notebook to be able to point towards the data. We spend a lot of time moving it out of silos, aggregating it, assimilating it, lots of different spreadsheets. And there's a lot of just time lost to dealing with data ops and management, which is not great. And then once you do that, there's a lot of these kind of long in between cycles where you're sort of throwing things over the wall. Oh, well, can I trade this as a compliant? Oh, well, okay, let's go look and, compliance, SMEs, quants, we're going to crunch on the spreadsheet. We're going to say, okay, we're going to pass that back now, over the wall, back and forth we go. And each group having kind of limited visibility, on the other, whenever they're in the throes of really kind of trying to get in there and dig in and make a recommendation or determine how it fits in the portfolio. And the net result of all of this is if there is good data science outcomes that comes out of it, so new analytics, potentially new algorithms, often this work is done either in Excel or even sometimes notebooks, but it's done more like in a shadow IT kind of project fashion. And it's difficult. The structures just aren't there, the infrastructure to be able to easily operationalize or even just routinely deploy data science outcomes when you have data scientists paired with trader desks and other SMEs. So it's a real challenge, lots of hiccups in here, lots of inefficiency. You can see lots of opportunity being lost throughout the course of this with wait times, inability to react, other opportunities going by that we're kind of inhibited in acting on. However, if you, this is again a more simplified diagram, and we're kind of taking, we're going to take out some of the other processes that no doubt still need to happen where they might be compliance issues or mandates and regulatory and things like that. But from pure, you think about the artifacts and the technology and the different actors. When you start to insert notebooks into the equation, you get something that looks a little bit more like this, where we now have common ground for being able to collaborate. So between traders, data scientists, developer quants, other SMEs. We've worked with folks that are in compliance that are starting to pick up notebooks and use Excel for some things, and notebooks are better for others. But now we have a common ground. So as a trader, I love my Excel. That's great. I could still send that information into notebooks where the work is happening, the examining, the algorithm, the diving into the metrics, trying to make sense of things, analyzing. And the notebooks aren't inhibited like Excel, right? They scale. And we're drawing on information from the cloud. So now we're also not inhibited by the local parameters that Excel is. And we're all kind of contributing into this same environment. And we'll show you here in a minute. We have some different flavors of environments that we work in, some of which are geared more towards data scientists and heavy power notebook users, and some of which are being picked up by other SME type users where a trader might even have, you know, a vantage point into that experience. So in short, before I show you the demo here, we're obviously pretty excited about notebooks as a way to augment existing processes and hopefully remove some of those inhibitors. I mentioned some of these things, but you know, in short, they're great for getting at better, more accurate data analytics. They have better processing capabilities. They can bite off more of the data, and we're coding in a notebook, right? So we can compile and code that real time. And also, just like other code, you know, if we change a variable in one place, we can choose to change it everywhere. Unlike Excel, where we sometimes have to go back and retouch everything, right? And we get things to compile, and there's a bit of a QC check there. And so we're increasing accuracy. Notebooks are generally pretty fast, you know. You're not really, you know, setting something to run in Excel, going and have a coffee break, coming back, hoping it hasn't crashed. And then if it hasn't, then you're having that second cup of coffee waiting. Some jobs can take long in notebooks, but generally notebooks are pretty fast. You're not waiting overnight for those batch reports, and they scale really well. They're typically highly performant. You're not limited to local storage or processing power. And as we're going to show here, the demo, they're really great for collaboration and being able to quickly send answers, kind of questions back and forth. So a little bit more about what I'm going to show now. So we've got a demo, and this art of the possible demo, as Brian described it, is between a trader desk, an SME who is collaborating. That SME could be sometimes that SME looks like, in this case, it's going to be a compliance scenario for a more complex financial instrument. And sometimes that notebook user can be, like, say, an SME as part of the compliance team. Sometimes that's a data scientist that's paired with an SME. And they're both kind of collaborating in that notebook environment. So let me, I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. Okay, so what we have here is we have a trader. And the trader is looking at kind of an aggregate of information. So this is a combination of some information you might get from an OMS, some other bits of information that you might typically get, let's say from a nightly batch report, that kind of a thing. So our trader is kind of looking at, you know, overall analytics for their portfolio and taking in the aggregates. They also, on the left, even though we're doing, here we have a combination of CLOs and some other instruments. So we're doing more more sophisticated financial instruments, but we're going to assume that we're running a little bit of machine learning. And so what we have here on the left are our next best actions that have been recommended by the system. So these might be kind of micro moves where they are a series of chess moves. Intended to either write something, maybe that's falling into compliance failure or will. It could be something that is a full, like, brand new suggestion of something to add in the portfolio. So it's a combination of balancing strategies, staying in compliance, like those kinds of recommendations. So we're gonna inspect one here. And so we're looking now at the details for this particular recommended next best action that they could choose to take. And this is a combination of multiple transactions of both buying and selling certain quantities within 2 different CLOs to rebalance the portfolio to make sure that it stays within compliance. And we can see a little bit here about the projection and some things about the obligor, how it fits into the general portfolio. Another thing we can do is as a trader, I could get in here and I could start to kind of modify this recommendation. So you can see I've got some different options here. And so very similar to how you might do a hypothetical, let's say in your trade blotter. So now we're into a little bit more of that kind of blotter functionality. So this is an example of where we might do a hypothetical for this particular vehicle. We're just going to do a couple of simple things here. So we're going to change the amount. And again, this is a prototype. So you'll see me click and you'll see some things kind of update here. But now we're going to look down here. So this has to do with our compliance. And I look at this. And so what's interesting here, there's several different categories of coverage. We've got a summary here in our view. But this collateral coverage, it seems a bit padded, right? So as a trader, I'm looking at this and thinking, well, you know, why do I have to have this particular trigger value up here, 55%, 55 of my test passing? I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to roll that back. I think I'm going to propose that maybe we can be a little bit more lenient on that. However, when I do that, I notice now that my compliance score has changed. So now I don't have that nice high score anymore. So that has me a little concerned. And I would like some quick answers to this. So rather than running through that lengthy process that we looked at earlier, we're in several hops and lots of data and lots of shuffling of all sorts of different reports and things. I'm just going to take this hypothetical and I'm going to share it. I'm going to, in this case, send it to compliance, and I already have a working relationship with them. So I'm probably already set up in some of their notebooks. I'm going to go ahead and send it there. And then when I do in this demonstration, we're now to the perspective of SM compliance who's using the notebook. So our notebook user is in their notebook doing some work, and they notice that there's been a new document that's come in, and they can see that it is probably a hypothetical, and it just came in. So they're going to go ahead and have a look at it. So we get a little information here in our notebook, and we have a little bit of detail here about the hypothetical. And I'm zeroing in, given my trader's message, that it seems like for the debt class, the AA debt class, you know, can we be a little bit more lenient on that collateral coverage testing? And I'm looking down here at the test results. So there's a lot of test results. So imagine if you were in Excel, you might have to comb through all those results to try to see what's passed or failed, write some VBA around it to maybe do that. Here in a notebook, this data, it's been shared with me. It's already in here. So as a notebook user, I can write a query. And in this query, I'm just going to say, I'm interested in things that have failed and things that I'm going to take a guess and say things that have failed as of today, because I just got this from my trader desk. So I'm going to see what that yields. And if this query doesn't yield anything of interest, I'm just going to write another query, or I'm going to modify this one, right? Nice and fast. Okay, so I run my query. And now I've got some feedback here on the specific aspects that have failed, and they are pertaining to the collateral, as the trader mentioned. So I'm taking a look at this. Now, at this point, we're not going to show it here today, but you know, in real life, we would go off and we would probably investigate in a little bit more detail some key metrics and some weights and some different things. One of the things we're going to show you today, rather than that, I think we can all imagine some of that. Something that we do with notebooks is we'll often introduce different ways of exploring the information, not just diving in you know, to kind of tabular based information. So you can see over here, we've got charts and graphs, and our compliance SME was already looking at that, but we're going to go ahead and write another little query here in order to visualize the information. So basically what we've done is we've said, okay, these on the collateral, I'm interested in certain kinds of loans and certain things that have these types of characteristics. excuse me. So that would be my query that I've written in here. And then I've pulled out in another cell here, I've got different kinds of visualizations at my disposal. So I've chosen in this case, a graph visualization underneath here, but I could have chosen, several different kinds. I could do that through code. I could do it by choosing here in a more WYSIWYG fashion. But what I can see here with the graph as I'm looking at it, yes, these were my results, but more than that, what the graph is pulling in is information across my portfolio. So now I'm not just looking at the Hightower CLO, I'm looking across my portfolio. And in this case, the way the query was written, I'm looking at certain kind of entities. So I'm looking particularly at trades, I'm looking at tests, and I'm looking at loans that are backed by collateral that are attached to those trades. And I could see here this kind of interesting path would be something that then I would focus on in my analysis back to the trader. So in the interest of time here today, you could imagine you could go deeper and you could do further analysis in the notebook. You could investigate every one of these entities and try to understand real time, very fast, in more detail of what's happening there. But we'll say that we're satisfied and maybe we've been able to draw some conclusions. So we're going to go ahead now. We're going to add another little cell here, another little code entry that's going to allow us to share this back to the trader. So now I'm back at the trading desk. I have my Hightower scenario that I had submitted to my friends in compliance, and they've returned to me in my either OMS, or in this case, I've got a dashboard that's more of an aggregate, an adjusted scenario. And so we're not going to show it here in the interest of time, but I could further investigate that, and we could continue to volley back and forth where real time they can, pick up my details from what I'm interested in trading, but rather than having to possibly wait for batch reporting to run or lack of computing resources, in a notebook, real time, you can run all of that very quickly and get more accurate results. So the trader that was thinking, maybe there's too much padding here, maybe I could have more money in the market, we could real time, very quickly test out those theories in a notebook, right? And answer back to that trader, yes, it's okay, go with that 45, that will work just fine. Or no, you need to stick with what we recommended originally, and here's why, because the blast radius of what you want to do across your portfolio is problematic. It's not just about this one instrument. So that concludes our demo. With that, I am going to hand it back over to Brian. Brian is going to talk a little bit about kind of behind the curtain, the different types of technology and operations and infrastructure that you need to be able to run things like the demo that I just showed, as well as kind of inject notebook analytics and tasks into some of the more common trade scenarios.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so how the heck do you make all of those things work the way Lynn just demoed? So I've got a handful of topics that I'll walk through in the next set of slides, and they really are broken into two different kind of chunks. One of them is how do we address some of these common challenges that Lynn has already outlined around data provenance. I've got files and where they come from, and how do I know, how did I know how they got built, what have you. How do I access corporate data, right? I can't dump a whole data lake into a CSV file so that my notebook can access it. And then how do I know that I'm processing data that I'm allowed to be processing, right? This security and audit controls. How do I know that the people consuming these CSV files they should be, or I'm allowing that they're accessing things that they should be, not just getting things emailed around to them. And then on the right side, we talk about opportunities. These are things that frankly just typically are not possible. These are things that now that you've got this big sandbox, which we call a notebook, that allows you to do things that previously possibly weren't really possible. Things like custom visualizations and presentation for unique data sets. Things like deeper integration. How do I reach into different parts of my corporate environment and access things that maybe previously were off limits or just had no way to get at them. Scheduled and background computations. I know we like to have instantly available machine learning routines, but sometimes these things take a little bit of time. I'd rather not stare at my notebook while it computes things. And then timely action. You know, I'd like to be able to benefit quicker. Lynn already talked about this, but how does that actually work? How do I actually consume and productionalize the output of my data scientists in a way that that does not take many cycles, days, or hours? And then democratized access, right? So why is it that only my data scientists or the people that that have access to the notebooks? You know, why shouldn't everybody be able to benefit from the computations or the learnings that these people have uncovered? So let's start with data provenance, right? So you saw in one of Lynn's examples, you know, I've got a data frame. I'm going to be loading up data from some CSV. Where did that file come from, right? Did it come from Tuesday's batch run or from Wednesday's? If I had some auditor questioning a decision that I made, I made some trading decisions based on that CSV file. Was it a good decision with bad data, or was it a bad decision with good data? You know, sometimes people care about that. And then suppose Lynn and I are collaborating on some work, right? Suppose I'm doing one part of a machine learning pipeline and she's doing something else. Are we using the same data sets, right? How do I stay away from the English, the pounds versus kilogram problem that the NASA scientists ran into? So this is a real challenge when we're emailing CSV files around. Imagine what if instead, if everybody emailing these CSVs around, your notebook could tap directly into your corporate databases. You know, what if it wasn't just CSVs, but you could go straight to SQL databases, S3 buckets, corporate data lakes, if you will. You know, I know what I'm accessing because my notebook is tied to that directly. What if I could connect different cells to different data sources, right? There's nothing that says that the first cell has to read from the same data source as the second one. And what if it honored all of your corporate security rules, you know, and audit trail? Talking about the accessing to the data stores, as I connect to my data store, I can also honor all the security and audit controls. If I pull data into a notebook or even at the cell level, then I can track each one of those data access events atomically. Furthermore, depending on my identity, maybe I'm able to write back some cells and Lynn is not, right? You know, I can honor read and write access patterns. And then if my auditor comes to ask me questions about this, I want to recompose what was in a notebook 3 Tuesdays ago. And when this decision was arrived at, I can go back to those audit tables, retrieve the data as it was back then, and recompose this notebook and say, this is what it looked like on 3 Tuesdays ago when we made this decision. All of these engineering rigor features are possible now. This tighter coupling is not just for the back-end data stores. Proper presentation of data is also important. An insight that may be obvious when presented one way may be overlooked if we're presenting data in a straight tabular format. And since we know data science oftentimes is as much detective work as it is computation, many times you want your data to talk back to you if it can, enticing you down avenues that may provide answers. Who knows how many opportunities I might have missed staring at thousands of columns and rows. Oftentimes pie charts and bar charts aren't the answer either. You know, how do you present something like an implication or a causality visually in a pie chart? You can't really. You need something custom for, you know, for the moment or for the use case or for the situation. You know, what you're trying to convey or possibly uncover oftentimes dictates that visual presentation, and oftentimes you need to be able to extend or customize or make a special visualization based on what you're trying to convey at that moment. Moreover, your notebooks can leverage other parts of your enterprise compute ecosystem. Maybe I want to incorporate some visualization from an external application like Lynn had already shown you, but perhaps maybe I also want to be pulling in data from outside third-party API vendors, right? So there's nothing that says that all of my data has to come from my corporate databases or CSV files. Perhaps I actually want to be accessing, external trade data, other market data that may not be incorporated into my corporate databases just yet. There's nothing that says I can't be reaching out directly to these third parties at real time. All the integrations could be hitting REST or GraphQL services, gluing together data during this analysis. These services can be wrapped in the same security and audit layers that we talked about for the database. So should you have any winding back or any sort of compliance or audit trail that you needed to talk about or understand, you could wind back to that snapshot in time, understand what queries were used to compose this notebook, and reassemble it for that snapshot in time. What often goes unsaid is sometimes these require lengthy computation for machine learning and data science initiatives. Notebook execution doesn't have to be initiated by a person pressing controls in a browser. For instance, I may have a multi-cell notebook that may collect data from several places, dole out some work to a Spark cluster, pull and collect some results when they're ready, and present some findings in a unique way later on to a trader or a risk manager. How long does all that take to run typically? Who cares? What if I could schedule it to run every Wednesday morning at 2 a.m. and I don't really care how long it takes because it's ready for me when I wake up and I start my day Wednesday morning. All of these things are possible when I've got my notebook tied to my data sources, secured through my corporate ecosystem, and runnable in background processing modes. And then suppose I'm working on one part of a computation in a cell, and then Lynn is working on a second part, right? As we get our respective portions working with the data sets that are controlled and audited, and we know how they're composed, we can check them in or deploy them to production, right? Taken along with some sort of an automated build or and the runnable notebooks that we talked about, you now have what looks like a very mature CICD pipeline. Oftentimes you hear Lynn and my colleague Graham Gansel talk about MLOps, which is really CICD for your data science, right? So I am now able to put together my computation, check it in portions, and deploy it when they are ready, and then ultimately take actions on these results. Democratizing the access, right? So we've talked quite a bit up to now about how I access things in my notebook, but as I've deployed through my CI/CD pipeline, and I'm using all of these code snippets or notebook computations or Spark jobs driven by notebooks, and then check back in and maybe updating databases, that this data science output can be consumed by anybody, as exemplified by Lynn's demo earlier in this webinar. So once I've got this matured and baked into my ecosystem, everybody benefits, not just the data scientists. If it sounds like we've done this before, it's because we have. We've built things like this with other clients, baking these notebooks into their environments, and some of you may be asking yourself, how do we get started? This sounds interesting. How do we get started? So what we typically suggest for customers are one of a handful of options. Sometimes we start with an assessment. What sorts of outcomes are you trying to achieve? What sort of environment would we be dropping this notebook integration initiative into? And what are your team's goals, and are they ready to consume such an initiative? There are many notebook options out in the marketplace that are possible to make something like this run. So we help you with the product selection. How do I pick the right notebook initiative and get started with a small initiative to prove that I can do many of the things we've talked about today. And then last but certainly not least is Lynn's vision prototype, creating this art of the possible so that you can see what you might be driving for, help you get support amongst your colleagues with initiative, or otherwise consensus build within your organization. Oftentimes this will help drive out requirements, because people do not realize the things that could be achieved by undertaking such a project. So I think that's all that we had to present today. I'll stop here for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. We had a couple of questions come in here. The first one is if I've built a notebook like you've described it, and I wanted to add new visualizations, how would I do that?
Well, there's a handful of options. As most notebook users know, there's input and output cells, right? So what you can do is extend. Oftentimes these notebook code bases are open source, and you can add to a library of existing visualizations. Oftentimes the output cell simply is expecting some sort of a data payload, JSON or something else. And by selecting the right type and the visualization type, you can hydrate the visualization with the data payload, oftentimes extendable with common HTML JavaScript libraries like D3 or Vega.
Okay. I got another question here that says, if I have a notebook, how would I extend it to other data sources like a third party or other databases?
Typically, this is done extending the different code bases do it differently, but most of the time they have a mechanism for accessing either the file system or some other data source, right? So there is an interface or some sort of a repeatable pattern that you can add to or augment, such that you can extend the data access patterns. For instance, in one case, we spoofed a file system so that normally I might be loading CSV files from a file system, but I can easily extend that to repoint to something like an S3 bucket, right? So I can now make sure everybody's loading from the same S3 bucket. That same paradigm works if I said, hey, I want to be putting things into or taking things out of an Oracle database. So usually it's done through extensions to the data access patterns already baked into the notebook.
Okay. And then one last question, which is, can this be used for streaming data feeds from tickers or other sources?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, got a few seconds here. So if there's any other questions, you can go ahead and enter those in. It looks like another question is, are there other kinds of plugins? It looks like an IEX would be the other one that I would also recommend, or third-party data sources that can plug in natively. And then other kinds of data widgets, if you will, I think are options as well. Correct, Brian?
Yes. Yes. The extensibility of the direct access of your notebook to hydrate itself from different data sources, be they internal or external, provided they have an API contract that we understand how to get things into and out of. It's reasonably straightforward.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, panelists. Thank you for everyone that attended. Just as a reminder, we'll be sending out a recorded link, so please share with other practitioners or other people that are interested. And thank you for your time today.